guys, welcome back to my channel. We'll start with the main structure and gradually build all the individual elements around it. First, let's create the main structure. Press Shift+A and add a cube. Go into Edit mode and press Ctrl+R to add a loop cut. Now select those faces. I want to make two inset sections here, so select the required faces and use I to inset them. Then delete the faces. The reason we're doing this is to create the opening while keeping the surrounding geometry under control. Now add a Solidify modifier and adjust the parameters. Make sure even thickness is enabled. This is a common beginner mistake. If the thickness isn't even, the walls can look noticeably different in different areas. Now duplicate this object. For this duplicate, we don't need the Solidify modifier anymore, so remove it and scale the object up slightly. Go into Edit mode, select those vertices, and press Shift-Ctrl-B to bevel the vertices. This gives us a softer transition, instead of leaving those corners completely sharp. Now select those vertices and use J to join them. Next, select those faces and press E to extrude them. Then delete the faces. Now duplicate this section and press P to separate those edges. Press E to extrude and adjust the position. We'll do the same thing for the side panels as well. The reason I'm building these pieces separately is that it gives us more control later when we start adjusting proportions, UVs, and textures. Now select the top face, duplicate it, and separate it.
Again, we don't want that Solidify modifier here, so delete it. Scale it up a little bit. Now, use Shift+Ctrl+B to bevel these vertices. Then press I to inset and delete the face. Select these faces and press E to extrude. If your proportions don't look right at this stage, don't worry. This is actually the best time to fix them. Turn on X-ray mode, select everything, and adjust the proportions as needed. It's much easier to fix the overall shape now than after we've finished all the details. Now let's add another plane. Give it some shape. Select these vertices, bevel them, and extrude the faces. Inset them slightly and join the vertices. I'm doing this because I want to avoid unnecessary ngons. Clean topology will make our later editing and subdivision much easier. Now select those edges. In Edit mode, select this edge, duplicate it, separate it, and extrude it. Next, add some loop cuts using Ctrl+R. Select the alternate vertices and move them along the Z-axis. Now select the alternate edges. Use Ctrl-B to give the shape some volume and variation. Before adding the Solidify modifier, make sure you've applied the scale. Then add the Solidify modifier. This is another small but important tip.
Applying scale before modifiers like Solidify and Bevel often gives you much more predictable results. Here, I'm deleting the extra parts that we don't need. Now adjust everything. Duplicate it and rotate it accordingly. Now, let's create the pineapple. Add a sphere. Scale it down a little bit and in edit mode, enable proportional editing. Scale it accordingly and start giving it the shape we need. Since we're making a pineapple, we don't want a perfect sphere. Try to give it that slightly elongated pineapple-like shape. Here, I've added a few edge loops and deleted those faces. Now select everything. Go to Faces and use Poke Faces. After poking the faces, use Alt-J to create this pattern. Now delete these edges. Select everything, press I to inset, then E to extrude. Use Alt-S to scale in the normal direction, and also scale the geometry individually. This creates that raised pineapple surface. Now bevel those edges. Hold C while beveling to clamp the bevel so it doesn't penetrate through the surrounding geometry. That's a very useful little trick when working with tight geometry. Now switch to X-ray mode, select the bottom faces, and delete them. We don't need those extra faces. I'm also deleting the top area here because we don't need unnecessary geometry hidden inside the model.
Now, let's create the pineapple leaves. Add a plane, adjust its position, location, and scale. Add 3 edge loops and adjust the shape. Extrude and scale it to 0 on the Z-axis. This gives us a nice flat base before shaping the leaf. Now give it some shape. I've added a Subdivision Surface modifier, and with proportional editing enabled, I'm adding some curvature to the leaf. This is important because completely flat leaves can make the model look very artificial. Now adjust the position. Duplicate the leaf and rotate it accordingly. Keep duplicating and rotating the leaves to create variation. Once you're happy with the arrangement, combine both objects. Now let's create the watermelon slice. Add a sphere. Turn on X-ray mode. Select half of it and delete that half. Do the same thing on the other side because we only want the shape of a slice. Select both of these faces and press F to fill the gap. Now I'm checking how many edges we have on this side. Based on that number, I'll add the same number of edges to the other side. This is important because grid fill works much better when the edge counts match. Now use grid fill to fill the gap. Add a bevel modifier and adjust the parameters. Now adjust the position, rotation, and scale of the watermelon slice. If you want, you can also adjust the proportions at this stage. Now duplicate that watermelon slice and adjust its position. Next, let's work on the wooden elements. I've added a bevel modifier to these wooden planks. And I'm also adding bevels to the top and these other objects. The bevels are important because perfectly sharp edges usually don't look very realistic once we start lighting and texturing the model.
Now I've applied the Solidify modifier. I'm adjusting those extra vertices. Select the vertices and merge them. Then add a bevel modifier. Now check everything and adjust the proportions. Add a bevel to this board as well. And I've deleted those extra faces here. Now I'm adding a bevel to this bottom area too. Next, let's create some additional leaves. In Edit mode, select the leaf part, duplicate it, and separate it. Adjust the pivot point and scale it up. I've also added a few extra leaves to make the arrangement feel more natural. Now add a cube. Adjust its position and scale to give it a simple pot-like shape. Select the face, inset it and extrude it. Then adjust its position. Scale the leaves down a little bit. Duplicate a few extra leaves as well.
Now add a bevel to the pot and combine everything. Adjust the position. Now let's add another cube. Delete the top face, add a few edge loops, and bevel them. Use Ctrl- to deselect the edges. Now press Ctrl-I to invert the selection and use bevel. Adjust the position.
Here, it's looking a little too tall, so I'll fix the proportions. Select those edges and use V to separate them. Then select the top faces by clicking L. Select the top faces and press SZ0 to straighten them. Now adjust the thickness and extrude those faces. Next, I've added a round cube. Duplicate it and adjust the position to give it some fruit-like shape. Select everything and press Ctrl-J to join it. Now I'm checking everything and giving each object the appropriate shade smooth setting type. Don't blindly shade everything smooth. Depending on the object, you may want different shading settings types. Now I've selected the middle edges of the leaves. Use Alt-S to scale them in the normal direction. This gives the leaves some additional shape and makes them feel less flat.
Now add another cylinder. Adjust the position and add an edge loop. Scale the top edges down. Extrude them and continue shaping the form. Then use grid fill to close the faces. Use Ctrl+B to bevel the edges. Now, duplicate these objects and scale them slightly to create some variation. Variation is important here because if every object has exactly the same size and shape, the final scene can start looking too procedural. Now select everything and move it upwards. Duplicate the wooden plank and adjust its position and scale. I'm also removing the hidden faces. There is no reason to keep geometry that will never be visible, especially when we're preparing the model for texturing.
Now let's move on to the UVs.
Now that our modeling is finished, let's move on to the UV unwrapping. This part might not look as exciting as modeling, but trust me, good UVs can make a huge difference when we start texturing. If the UVs are messy, stretched, or wasting a lot of space, you'll end up fighting with the texture later. For the UVs, I'm using Rhizome UV, but if you don't have Rhizome UV, don't worry. You can absolutely use Blender's built-in UV tools as well. The overall idea and workflow are pretty much the same. The main goal here is simple. We want to take our 3D objects and flatten them into clean, usable 2D UV islands without unnecessary stretching and without wasting too much UV space. Think about it like opening up a cardboard box and laying it flat on a table. That's basically what we're doing with our 3D model. Now, in Rhizome UV, we have a few useful shortcuts that make this process much faster. F1 switches to vertex mode, F2 switches to edge mode, F3 switches to face mode, and F4 switches to island mode. These shortcuts might seem small, but when you're unwrapping a lot of objects, they save quite a bit of time. Instead of constantly moving your mouse around the interface, you can quickly switch between the different selection modes. Now let's start cutting our UVs. To select an edge loop, simply double-click the edge. Once you've selected the edge loop that you want to use as a seam, press C to cut it. This is basically telling the software, okay, this is where I want this 3D surface to open up. Then press U to unwrap the object. And finally, press P to pack the UV islands. Packing is important because we don't want our UV islands scattered randomly across the UV space. We want to use as much of the available space as possible.
So the basic workflow is select the seam, cut, unwrap, pack. And then we repeat the same process for the rest of the objects. Obviously, if you're new to UV unwrapping, this part can feel a little repetitive. And honestly, even after you've done it hundreds of times, it can still feel repetitive. So I'm going to speed this part up a little bit. But before we do that, I want to mention one really important thing. Try to think about your texturing before you start unwrapping. This is something beginners often overlook. A lot of people finish the model, unwrap everything randomly, and only then start thinking about the texture. But if you already know that a particular area is going to have a lot of texture detail, scratches, labels, or a specific material, you can plan your UVs around that. For example, if I know that this wooden board is going to have a lot of visible wood grain, I want the UVs to be oriented in a way that makes sense for that grain. Similarly, if an object is going to be mostly hidden or doesn't need much texture detail, there's no reason to give it a huge amount of UV space. So this little bit of planning can actually save you a lot of time later when you're texturing. Now I'm continuing to unwrap the rest of the objects. As you can see, the process is basically the same. Select the appropriate edges, cut them, unwrap them, and then pack the islands. And don't worry if your UV layout doesn't look exactly like mine. There can be multiple correct ways to unwrap the same object. The important things to look for are minimal stretching, logical seams, clean islands, and efficient use of UV space. Once we've finished unwrapping everything, I'm going to start stacking similar objects. This is one of my favorite ways to save UV space. For example, if I have several objects that have exactly the same shape and don't need unique textures, there is no reason to give every single one of them a completely separate UV area. Instead, we can stack their UV islands on top of each other. That way, multiple objects can share the same texture information. And this means we're making much better use of our available UV space. The more efficiently we use the UV space, the more texture resolution we can potentially get for the areas that actually matter. So I'm going through the UVs and stacking the similar objects together. Now let's bring everything back into Blender and check the model once again. I always recommend doing this check. Don't just assume that because the UV software says everything is fine, everything is automatically perfect. Go back into Blender, look at the model from different angles, and make sure all the objects are there, and nothing got accidentally left behind. This is also a good opportunity to check if there are any objects that still need to be duplicated. If I need multiple copies of the same object, I can duplicate them here. I'm duplicating the similar objects and checking everything again. And here's one small issue I noticed. We didn't cut this area of the pot properly, so I'm going back and unwrapping this section. This is completely normal during UV work. Sometimes you look at the UVs and realize, oh, I forgot that part. It's much better to catch these things now rather than discovering them after you've already started texturing.
So I'm adding the necessary cut and unwrapping this area. Whenever possible, I also try to straighten the UV islands. Straightening is especially useful for objects that have a fairly straight or manufactured shape. For example, with wooden planks, straight UVs make it much easier to control the direction of the wood grain later. Once that's done, I'll pack everything again. Now let's check everything one more time. At this point, I don't want to rush through the UVs just because the modeling is already finished. A few extra minutes here can save a lot of frustration during texturing. I'm also duplicating the object and placing a few of these pieces wherever I want. And this brings me to another useful workflow tip. Whenever possible, duplicate similar objects after you've finished unwrapping them. The reason is that if you unwrap the original object first and then duplicate it, the duplicated object can use the same UV layout. That means we don't have to unwrap the same shape again and again. It also allows us to stack the UVs and make much better use of our texture space. For example, if I have 5 identical leaves, I don't necessarily need 5 completely separate UV islands. I can unwrap one properly and reuse that UV layout for the others. This is especially useful when you're working with props that contain lots of repeated elements. It keeps the UV layout cleaner, saves space, and makes the texturing process much more efficient. I'm using the same approach here and duplicating the pot as well. Since the pot uses the same basic shape, there's no reason to create a completely different UV layout if the duplicated versions are going to use the same texture. So I'm duplicating it and placing it where I need it. And now our UVs are in a much better state. We have our objects unwrapped, the similar pieces are stacked where appropriate, and the UV space is being used much more efficient. One final thing I always recommend before moving into texturing is to check everything one more time. Look for overlapping UVs that shouldn't be overlapping, stretched islands, missing seams, objects that weren't unwrapped, and unnecessary empty space. If something looks wrong now, fix it now.
Because once we move into Substance Painter and start baking and texturing, fixing a UV problem can become much more annoying. So take a little extra time here. Once everything looks good, we're ready to move on to the next stage, texturing. And this is where all the preparation we've done with the modeling and UVs is going to start paying off. Now, select everything and export it as FBX. Here, I'm exporting each object once so that the UVs don't overlap unnecessarily when we take the model into Substance Painter. If we simply export everything together and then bake without preparing the objects properly, we can end up with unwanted baking artifacts. So preparing the objects and UVs properly at this stage will save us a lot of trouble later. And that's it for today's video. We've completed the modeling, cleaned up the important geometry, created all the fruit and supporting details, prepared the UVs, stacked similar objects, and exported everything ready for texturing. In the next video, we'll take this model into Substance Painter and start texturing it.
And after the texturing is finished, we'll take it a step further with lighting, camera setup, rendering, and a little camera animation to bring the whole scene to life.
So if you enjoyed the tutorial and want to see the complete process from modeling all the way to the final animated render, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for the next parts. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye.